Thank you, Matthew. Promethean certainly excited to be here today and want to thank Education Week for putting on such a great event. In my role at Promethean, I get to travel around the country and work with large school districts, much like the ones you represent, and certainly we see a lot of the same issues have been discussed here today. As most of you know, Promethean is a global education company that's been making interactive hardware and technologies for some time now. As we move into the next generation of our company, we're looking really to create new opportunities to build knowledge, and this is through a growing number of strategic alliances. And we encourage you to stop by and chat with us today so we can talk to you about some of the new things that we're doing. But the goal really is to help schools and teachers to build knowledge by boosting student engagement and also increasing student outcomes. Today we're delighted to have with us Will Richardson and Rob Mancabelli, the co-authors of Personal Learning Networks, Using the Power of Connections to Transform Education. Some of you will know Will from the cover story in the spring issue of Education Week's Teacher PD Sourcebook. Will was a public school educator for 22 years and is co-founder of Powerful Learning Practice, a professional development program that has mentored over 3,000 teachers worldwide. He has spoken to tens of thousands of educators in over a dozen countries about the merits of learning networks for personal and professional growth. He's been writing about the intersection of social online learning networks and education since 2001. Will's own blog, which is weblog-ed.com, is a major resource for the creation and implementation of blog technologies on the K-12 level and is a leading voice for school reform in the context of the fundamental changes that new technologies are bringing to all aspects of life. And together with Rob Mancabelli, he's written Personal Learning Networks. Rob Mancabelli draws on more than 20 years of experience in educational leadership technology and planning to partner with schools to develop 21st century learning organizations. Since 2003, Rob has inspired audiences around the world with insights into the process of change, strategies for engaging stakeholders, and methods for transforming organizations to meet the rapidly evolving demands of a globally connected world. Please join me this afternoon in welcoming Rob Mancabelli and Will Richardson. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. We both know that the after lunch crowd is usually the toughest crowd of the day, so we're going to make this highly interactive and really fast-paced, so buckle up. We're going to start by giving you actually a back-channel chat in which you can participate and have a conversation among yourselves while we are presenting. Please feel free to use the, please feel free to go ahead and go to todaysmeet.com/edweekphl if you want to participate. This is a place where you can ask questions, you can add links, add resources, share ideas, and interact with one another as we're talking. And we do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, because we really want to deepen the presentation for you guys, have you be active while we're up here kind of talking. But also, we learn from the interactions that you provide in these chat rooms and in these back channels. So the address again is todaysmeet.com/edweekphl. And when you get there, it'll look like, we'll make this work. There we go. Okay. So where's Todd? You get the free iPad, Todd. No, just kidding. Just kidding. No iPad. All right. So if you guys get in here, you can participate, you can chat, you can ask questions, you can interact, and we really would like you to do that. And once more, the address is right there, todaysmeet.com/edweekphl.
And the reason we do this is because Will and I are both educators, and that's where we started. We both started in the classroom. And we like to use as many tools as possible that we actually used in our classrooms and encourage people to use in our classrooms. So this is one of the things that is in hundreds of thousands of classrooms around the world. Possibility is there for students to actually talk to each other and to ask each other questions and to have conversation about the learning that they're doing in real time. So this is something not only for us to use here, but something for you to think about for your own schools.
Go ahead.
So we're going to start this conversation today by talking about learning. And I thought that Lee Nunnery asked a terrific framing question this morning in his opening conversation. He asked the question, what is the value of technology? And what Will and I want to say to you right up front is, philosophically, we believe that you can't provide an excellent 21st century education in 2011 without using technology. You can provide a good 20th century education. Students can learn things They can graduate, but we don't really believe you can achieve excellence without particularly incorporating social learning networks into everything you do. So what we're here today to talk about is to talk a little bit about how you can manage change in your district or in your area, but we're also here to talk about the kinds of change that you might want to think about implementing, and for us, that's social learning. So let's do a quick survey of who's in the room. Show of hands. We got to get people up and going after lunch. So raise your hand if A, you are currently incorporating online social learning tools throughout your classrooms. Ah, very nice, very nice. B, beginning to incorporate social learning. So you're trying to get over the hump. Wow, that's an amazing change from just 2 years ago. Thinking it's a good idea, but I haven't started yet. Okay, very honest of you. And for the final category, what is that social learning thing that you keep referring to during the first 5 minutes of this presentation? Very brave. Very brave person over there. Okay, so that gives us an idea of who's in the room. That's terrific. What we're going to talk about today are the yeah buts. And the yeah buts that we're referring to are when you launch a technology initiative and you begin by meeting a teacher in the hallway and you're all excited and you tell them what that initiative is going to be, and they say to you, yeah, I kind of get that technology is important for learning, but fill in the blank. And what we're going to do today is we're going to have an opportunity to actually talk to you about what those yeah buts are for you and to talk about how to solve them. The reason that we're the ones who are doing this work is because we frankly live connected lives. Will and I have thousands of followers on Twitter. We both blog. Will has been blogging for 10 years. He's probably the longest consecutive edu-blogger out there. We both believe that our social networks are the people that we learn from on a daily basis. So each and every day of our lives, Will and I learn by interacting with people from around the world. The second reason that we talk about this subject is because we work with lots of schools. We get a lot of perspective by talking to schools from Boston to Burbank, by working in schools from Stockholm to Sydney, Australia. We really have a global perspective on why students should be using technology to enhance their education and what kinds of tools they should be using that, again, to go back to the conversation this morning that Lee kicked us off with, are really effective tools for changing the learning environment and making it better than it could ever possibly be without those tools, versus the tools that are taking up a lot of time and a lot of money, but are really not producing any kind of payoff in the end when it comes to learning. And finally, we study how people change. We base our recommendations to you on the literature that's out there around how to change organizations. We don't get up here and say, here's what you should do, now good luck. That's a very frustrating message to hear. What we say is, here's what we think you should do, and here's how we think you can do it, so that every single member of your organization, 100% from top to bottom, not just the early adopters, not just the people who are willing to take on a risky type of thing, not just those who are open-minded, but every single person throughout the organization gets on board with the change process and actually adopts it and changes both themselves and their classrooms. And that's really important. So we're going to get beyond what we discussed in our book, Personal Learning Networks, and we're going to create the EdWeek Top 10 today, and then we're going to answer all of those things by showing you an approach as to how you can approach the change process. So as we talk today, the one thing I would ask each of you to do is to think a little bit about, Will's going to, over the next 10 minutes or so, unveil a lot of what we believe should be the philosophy of educators in 2011 as they approach creating teaching and learning environments. As he talks, think about how would that message be received in my school, and what would be the yeah buts that would come up as people hear that message?
So I think it goes without saying that this is an amazing time to be a learner. In fact, I would say it's probably an unprecedented moment in terms of our access to knowledge, to information, and to people. And the world is really changing in some pretty interesting ways right now. If you ask anyone who's in journalism, ask anyone who's in media, ask them if they're in healthcare, the best day of my life actually was a couple of weeks ago when I went to a doctor's appointment. My doctor brought in an iPad into the examining room, right? Because I knew that he was accessing the most current information that he possibly could. All of these industries, and ask any musicians or artists or anything else, all of these industries are being changed fundamentally by the access that we now have to information and knowledge in some pretty important ways. Any of you buying encyclopedias this year for your schools? All right, and of course you're not. Although now recently, Encyclopedia Britannica now I think is coming out with an app that you can buy, you can license for, I think it's $20 a year or $25 a year or something like that. You know, Kodak didn't get it. Kodak did not understand that the world was fundamentally changing around technologies, digital technologies and connections. And that was, you know, that basically tells the tale. And I have a worry that education is going to have a similar type of stock chart there if we don't begin to figure out the really transformative changes that are happening here. So here's the difference that we have to understand. If we have access, and I know there are lots of kids that don't have regular access, and you know, the United Nations has basically said that it is a moral imperative for every child to be connected, every person to be connected to the internet right now. The idea that we still have millions of kids in this country that aren't connected, I think is immoral almost. How can you deny kids access to the basically sum of human knowledge that we are building online? I know it's complex, I know it's not all correct, I know there are issues with it, but to say that we are not going to give kids access, I think that creates a huge divide that we're going to have to deal with for many years to come. And by the way, it's not just about the access to the information, it is also access to people. And that's, I think, the biggest shift here. It's the social piece that we have in terms of connecting to people from around the world. So it is anytime, anywhere, but it is also anyone. And that anyone part is the really difficult, I think, piece for schools to get their brains around, because it poses all sorts of challenges for us. Now, there are going to be 2 billion people who are connected to the web this year. It'll be 5 billion people by the end of this decade, and most schools look at that and they say, oh my God, that's 2 billion predators. We don't want those people connected to our kids. We don't want to have all those people coming in and interacting with the kids in schools. But here's the deal. Here's the shift that we have to make in our brains in the way we think about this. It's not 2 billion predators. It's really 2 billion potential teachers that our kids have. And I know not every one of those teachers is going to be, or every one of those people is going to be a good teacher for my own kids. I have a 12 and a 14-year-old, but I'm going to say something that may shock you, but I absolutely mean it. I want my own children to be found by strangers on the internet. I absolutely do. I want them to be found by the right strangers. I want them to be able to discern the right strangers from the bad strangers. But the idea that my kids are not going to be learning with people from around the world who they will never meet in their lives is ridiculous. It's already happening. Most of the kids in your schools are going home and connecting to people from around the world who they don't know. And in many cases, those people are teachers in their lives. And the question that Rob and I are continually asking is, how are we preparing kids to deal with that reality? How are we preparing kids to deal with a world that looks very different outside the classroom walls than it does inside the classroom walls? That is the huge tension that we have right now as educators. It's a challenge, but it's a huge opportunity. This is an amazing time to be a learner. It is an amazing time. I'm a poster child for learning in terms of 21st century connections with people around the world, and I cannot go back. If you took the strangers out of my life right now, if you took those people who we see as predators out of my life right now, I don't know how I'd learn. I don't know how I would continue to learn and examine my own life and reflect and move forward. So look, we are not immune to this shift. It is going to happen to schools. It is going to happen to us individually. We cannot fight this. The question is, can we embrace it? And if we are not able to embrace change at this moment, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. If you can't look at the change and begin to make sense of it and embrace it and make it an opportunity instead of a challenge, we're in trouble, because it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. And it really is about networks. It's about these social interactions that we have with people from around the world, and it's this idea that we are connected in some really important ways right now to a lot of people. How many of you use social bookmarking? Delicious. I know a few of you probably do. This is my Delicious network. These are brilliant people who are reading and sharing and putting their stuff out there so that I can learn from them on a regular basis. And it's an amazing thing that has happened in my life. I am smarter from them.
And a good end goal for you to think about, if you want to really frame it, is when your kids graduate, they shouldn't be looking at a bookshelf full of textbooks, or even just a digital bookshelf full of textbooks, and think that's my learning. They should be looking at that. They should be looking at this network, and they should be saying to themselves on graduation day, I'm taking with me hundreds of people who I have learned from the first 12 years of my educational experience, and those people are the same people who are going to continue to teach me throughout my life.
So it is about different learning networks, different learning environments as well. We're not just learning in classrooms. Your kids are not just learning in classrooms any longer. They are learning lots of different places, if they have access. And they are learning in gaming environments. This, by the way, I don't know if you heard this, this is Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who is creating an iCivics game for kids to learn civics. And we live at a moment when the reality is that many kids will be better served by games than they will by classrooms. I mean, if you have 50 kids in a classroom, like kids in Detroit right now, teachers in Detroit, there are opportunities in these different environments that may serve kids better than putting them into a room with 49 other people that is really difficult to individualize and personalize. And we need to embrace that as well. If we're here to serve kids, we got to look at that and say that's a good thing. It's a good thing that there are other opportunities that they have. But here's the challenge, right? Institutions will try to preserve the problem to which they are the solution. And that is education's moment right now. This is what we're struggling with. We don't want to fundamentally change what we do because we have gotten a fairly good solution to the problem that we were posed when we structured this system. You know, this is a huge undertaking to educate every child in this country so that that child can be a functioning citizen. That's a huge undertaking. And it's no wonder that we set it up as age grouped in discipline-specific classrooms and that we systemized it the way that we did. And we made it one size fits all because that is the easiest way to make this happen. But the problem is now is that that system is not going to work in a world where kids don't need to be age grouped. They don't need to be in discipline-specific classrooms any longer. They go online and none of that makes any sense any longer in those interactions that they have. My learning life is on the right. My own children's learning life is on the left. And I am not taking their teachers to task for this. I'm taking the system to task for this. I am totally frustrated as a parent right now because my kids are being educated for the 20th century. No one in their classrooms and no one in their schools really has any concept of what they do when they come home and they go online and they learn with strangers from around the world, which is what they're doing. My son loves basketball. He is a part of basketball forums, fantasy leagues, all sorts of stuff. He is interacting with people who he will never meet. My daughter, thankfully, loves to bake. And she is on all sorts of baking forums and cooking forums and interacting with people who she will never meet, right? So I am digital and connected and create. It's all about creation and open, whereas they go to schools and none of that stuff happens. And look, this is what schools look like. And I can tell you with very, very close accuracy what my son will be studying in math class on October 4th, 2013. And you know I'm right. You know I'm right. He's going to go through this system and he's going to learn what we want him to learn, when we want him to learn it, how we want him to learn it, and we're going to assess him in that same way. And yet he comes home and he goes, what is that about? Why are we doing that? That looks nothing like what happens when he comes home. His learning and my daughter's learning and my learning is mobile, it's self-directed, it's personalized, it's open, it's on demand, and it's with everyone. And if this is what learning looks like, what we're suggesting to you is, shouldn't that be what classrooms look like? Shouldn't that be what's happening in classrooms? Because this is what will prepare kids for the worlds that they are going to enter. And this is the big change that we are going to have to undertake. We are convinced of this. You may not be, but we are convinced that in the next decade, this is the change that we have to make, or schools are going to be in some deep trouble. in terms of remaining relevant, not only to the kids who they serve, but to the society, which we are trying to use schools to help perpetuate. So that's a very quick overview of how we see the world. And that's not a vision. That's just a version. That's here already. That's already happening. And the question is now, how do we get schools up to speed? And what are those yeah buts? What are those pushbacks that we're going to have to understand?
You know, someone once told me that awesome resources come with awesome responsibility. The more to which you are given, the more from which you should be expected. And I think that's our moment in time right here. You know, 15 years ago, none of this would have made sense or really mattered to anyone in this room. And 15 years from now, we'll have figured this all out. And we'll laugh about the days when we were trying to figure it all out. But if you're in this room in 2011, you picked the really exciting time to be in education, where it's not worked out. And so the question is that when Will talked about how we see the world, I know that everybody in the room at some point in that presentation said, yeah, but what about this? So what we're going to ask you to do right now is take 1 minute and write some of those down. And then we're going to ask people to shout those out. We're going to ask people to tell us what the yeah buts are. It could be your personal one, or it could be the one that you think you would get from the most number of stakeholders in your school. Okay? What would be the yeah but that someone would say when you say to them that education should look like this? Okay? Take 1 minute and go ahead. And you don't have to buy into this yet to say the yeah but. Then you could just say a personal yeah but. Okay? So take 1 minute, write those down, and then we're going to ask for volunteers. We good? Sorry about that stumble at the beginning. That's okay. Are we good? We have 15 minutes. Are we good with the putting the stuff in the survey?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. So let's take the first answer. Who's going to be our brave first person to shout something out?
Don't be shy. Yep. Go ahead.
All right. Well, what about the tests? Right? What about the tests? Yeah. What about safety? But what about safety? Yep. Yes. What about efficiency? Yep. What about structure?
Structure in terms of what? Like the structure of the school day, structure of the system? Structure of the curriculum?
So the tension between personalization and being able to... Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
I hear you. Yeah.
What else?
Yes, in the back in the red. What about accountability?
Okay.
Kind of fits with the test, but in a different way. Yeah. Yeah, but
you can't do that because...
In which way? Yeah. What? Give us your flavor of
not
you
legal?
Can't do that. So how about but that's impossible. It's overwhelming.
There's just
no
blanket the whole thing right there.
No way we'd get it all done. That's completely overwhelming. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, but we don't have the money. Actually, that's usually the first one that comes up. Everyone in here must be rich.
Well, there's another one that usually comes up that no one's gotten. Over here?
I'm just joking about that. Go ahead. So how do we get it in the hands of everyone, or how do we make it equitable? Yep. How are we going to what?
Professional development.
How are we going to provide professional development?
Okay.
Are we good, or do you want to go with one more? Or?
Well, I'm going to throw time on this list, right? You guys haven't mentioned it, but would anyone stop me from putting time on the list? Okay.
Yeah, but where are we going to get the time to do it?
Yeah.
All right, let's go with that list.
All right. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a survey that we're going to have you guys take. And it's going to take me 1 second to get it going here. But
so what we're going to do next is we're going to give you an approach to answering these yeah buts that's based in the change management literature. And there's two kinds of literature we read. We read the stuff that nobody else reads, that is sort of the journal articles and things like that. And we also read the popular stuff that we believe is actually doing a nice job translating the literature around change into human terms. So while Will's getting that ready, a quick recommendation to you, if you haven't heard of either of these books, or if you haven't looked at either of these books, the one on the left is called Switch. It's by a pair of brothers, Chip Heath and Dan Heath, who are both professors. One does organizational behavior, the other does psychology. And the other one is by Alan Deutschman. It's called Change or Die. Switch is a more comprehensive, more well-supported, better overall book. Change or Die is one of those books that sort of has a single concept, but I think he embarks on and tells the story of that single concept really well. So if you're looking for something for a leadership team to collaborate around when it comes to change and different things like that, I just want to throw those out there. All right, so here is the link to vote. So if you go to http://bit.ly/yeah-but-Philadelphia, PHL. Yeah, but PHL. You can see the survey that we just created, and you can vote on the results. So I see some people are using their phones, some people are using their computers. So I think that illustrates sort of the flexibility that people have nowadays to use multiple devices. I also noticed that some people don't have anything at all, which is kind of what it feels like when you're left out of the digital conversation and you feel like you don't have a vote. Again, we kind of try to model what's going on in our classrooms with what's going on in our presentations. And that's something that happens to our kids each day, especially those who have to go home to an unconnected world. I recently, I was actually a couple years back at this point, I did a technology survey for an urban district that found that 15% of their students were connected at home. 15%. That was it. It was a remarkable, enlightening statistic.
So we have 43 responses. Do you want to go with that?
Yep.
All right. So we have 43 responses come in already.
Do you want to bring it up on the other computer, or do you want to?
No, I'm just going to have to read them
Go ahead.
out. The number one was, what do you think? Well, since most of you voted for it, you probably get it. Money, in terms of being able to afford some of these changes. And then the second one was the trying to get your brain around how assessments change. And then there was a tie for structure of the curriculum and time.
Time, yeah.
So
it's usually up there. All right, so let's talk about these. Let's talk about, and by the way, we will make those survey results available in the presentation as soon as we finish up here. So if you want to be able to take a look at those and continue to vote. Did you close it? Or is
no,
still,
it's good.
So you could still vote if you want to. So let's talk about where these yeah buts come from. And I want to tell a story that comes from the book that I referred to by Alan Deutschman. And it's a study of heart patients. And these heart patients were in pretty bad shape. These were people who had gone to their doctor, and they had found out from their doctor that their heart was in such poor condition at that point, from a combination of lifestyle factors, cholesterol, and a bunch of other reasons. They had found out that their heart actually was in such bad shape that their doctor said to them, if you don't change your lifestyle within 5 years, you will die. I can show you the statistical research. People who come into my office with the level of cholesterol that you have, with the level of blockage that you have, with the kind of heart that you have, the EKG results, 99.9999% of them are dead within 5 years. So these are people who are facing what is possibly the most important change of their lives. whether they can change their lifestyle, whether they can lose weight, whether they can exercise, whether they can reduce stress in order to successfully continue living. And the way that they did a study at Johns Hopkins University, and what they found at Johns Hopkins was the most common thing that doctors did when they would find a patient that was in this situation is they would give them two things. First, they would give them the speech I just gave you, change or die. That's the motivation part. And the second thing they would do is they would provide them with lots and lots of information about how to change. They would give them the names of people that they could contact who are nutritionists. They would give them the names of exercise physiologists. They would tell them the kinds of things they had to do in terms of lifestyle changes. And then they would send them on their way. So the question is how many changed? If we were to do just a show of hands as to, let's say, 2 years later, what percentage of the patients who were in that condition changed? How many people in the room would say that 90% of the patients changed? Raise of hands. Okay, no one. 75%. Okay? 50%. Half. Okay, about half the room. Maybe a little more. 25%. Okay, most of you think that a quarter would be a pretty good benchmark to hit. Anybody want to go lower? Good, we have some cynics in the room. I like that. You'd be right. 10%. 2 years later, 10% of the patients that they surveyed had changed. Now, the question is, how could that be? And the reason is because that's what you should expect if you engender a change process that is driven by two things: rational reasons and motivation. Okay, so how many people have taken on a change project at their school and thought to themselves, well, I've perfectly explained to them why we have to do it. All the reasons are in place. I've led them through the steps. I've provided, the information for how they're going to get there. How many people have done a change project like that and achieved similar results? Raise of hand. Yeah. Sometimes we're a little more successful. Sometimes it's 20%. Sometimes it's 30%. What a lot of the literature points to is that there's a big missing ingredient here. And the big missing ingredient can be found in a second story. And that's a story that is also about heart patients who were given the same speech. But they were given that speech in California in the offices of Dr. Dean Ornish. And Dean Ornish did a 3-year study in which he said, I'm going to take a different approach than a rational, motivation, informational approach to change. And what Dr. Ornish did was he started by having a conversation with patients about who they are. And he said to them, do you think that you can successfully change to become a more healthy person over the next 3 years so that we can keep you alive? And most patients said, absolutely not. I'm not a healthy person. I don't live that kind of life. I don't think I could ever be that. I just don't think it's possible. And so what he was doing was he was opening up a conversation that was about their worldview, about who they thought they were inside, and why the actions that they were taking every day were perfectly aligned with who they were inside. And what he did was he found that he would ask them, would you like to try to be a healthy person? And 99% of them would say yes. So they would set up long-term goals. I want to be a healthy person in 5 years. But then they would set up a real series of very short-term, tangible results that they could do on a weekly, on a monthly, and on a yearly basis to actually achieve that long-term goal. The other thing was he didn't tell them about support. He actually required them to participate in the support process. One of the geniuses, I think, about this, and I'm going to go over this in summary, but is he didn't require the program. The program's voluntary. But if you take part in the program, the support is mandatory. So they met with a nutritionist. They met with exercise physiologists. Perhaps most importantly, they met with each other, and they talked to each other. And the most common thing they said when they talked to each other is, 1, this is really hard. 2, I failed a lot this week. 3, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And in that group, what they said to them was, no, we think you can make it. Remember the short-term goals. Remember, we're not trying to change everything overnight. We're trying to get there. Dr. Dean Ornish's success rate was 77%. 3 years later, 77% of those patients, actually, many of them had moved completely off of medication, had completely changed their lifestyle, had lost hundreds and hundreds of pounds combined, were exercising on a regular basis. It's a fascinating success story. If you have a chance to read about it, I highly recommend it. So what did he do? He said to himself, a lot of people, when I tell this story, think that the message of this story is not to be rational. And that's not the message. No, we need that. We need you to say, here's the information, here's how we have to change. The key is that that's not enough. That you also have to rope in that worldview, and that if you don't rope in the person's worldview, probably if you're going to err on one side or another, this is the side that's probably more important. It's probably more important for you to engage someone in that conversation about who they are and how they're going to change than it is to actually give them the tools to change. If you remember only one thing from this presentation about change, this is the one thing I'd like you to remember. That the change we want in our schools is less about teaching skills and more about embracing new roles. You could do all the professional development in technology in the world, and if you don't tap into how a teacher views themselves and what kind of thoughts they're bringing to their classroom, none of it is going to stick. And if you talk to them about who they are right now and why they're teaching the way they are and why they're maybe not using social networking or not differentiating instruction or not doing individualization, the irony is they're not doing it because we created a system that never rewarded them for it. And so you have people who for the last 15 years have been asked to keep kids quiet in class, have been asked to perform an effective lecture, submit lesson plans that are orderly, all of the things that Will talked about being in the conversation that kind of keeps schools the same. And now we've got this inflection point in 2009, 2008, 2011, where we're saying, oh my God, we have to change. And they're saying, these are the things I pride myself on as a teacher. So the first conversation that has to take place in our schools, if you really want things to change, is a conversation about who we are. And if you do that in your professional development process, you're probably going to do more to jar the overall change initiative in the district than anything else you could do.
And let me just jump in really fast. We were kind of having a back and forth in the chat about, how do we do this with speed, with some, so it doesn't take a long time. But this really is the first part. We have to talk about this. We have to begin to really reframe the way that we look at the world and the way that our staff and our students and everyone in the school community begins to look at learning and how learning happens right now.
Yeah, we're really good in schools at saying things like, I want to go from Boston to California and I only have $10 and how do I make that happen? And the answer sometimes is well, I can lie to you and tell you, there's this really quick way to make it happen really cheap. Or I can really level with you and say, learning is hard, it's going to take a while, people are going to take a while, but you can really build in amazing short-term wins that will impress your community, your parents, your stakeholders, your board members. One of the things that my company recently developed, I have a company, Change 21, is we've developed a metric that teachers and students can take that will actually show you where your school is right now on a 21st century scale. And you can track that progress over time as you initiate initiatives that change who teachers are and what they're teaching and what the content is like. So let's take one example. Yeah, but I don't have enough time. The rational response to yeah, I don't have enough time is, yeah, but if you invest time now, it'll save you time later. And how about if we take a faculty meeting and we'll make time to discuss this at the faculty meeting? And what if we schedule a half day for the students once a year, twice a year, and we have all the teachers meet and we'll talk about this? And in your spare time, why don't you get on social networks and learn more about it on your own time so that, we'll have more time at school to focus on other things. This is, when done in isolation, a wonderful way to actually waste a lot of time. So what's the flip side? The flip side is inviting people into having a conversation about how long this change is going to take, asking them what they need to succeed, telling them that there's no bar to get over. I think I have to quibble a little bit with someone this morning who was saying the really important thing about having these programs in schools is that we make them mandatory. I actually have found the exact opposite, that mandatory programs shed a white-hot spotlight on the people who want to resist the program and create a bully pulpit for them to talk about why this shouldn't happen. Whereas with voluntary programs, we can usually achieve a 100% participation rate in only 3 years, sometimes in 2 years. So what we want to leave you with is we were going to do, if we had a little more time, we were going to do a going through your yeah buts here. We'd like you to do that on your own. We'd like you to take a look at the presentation that we put online and to think a little bit about those yeah buts and the ways that you might be able to engage people in both a rational but also an emotional conversation that kind of taps into who they are. And think about whether or not that would be a really effective way for you to convince them to change. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.